Good afternoon, out and about Nashville viewers. We are here this afternoon with Representative Mike Stewart of the Tennessee General Assembly. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We're in the middle of election season. I know for a lot of people it may not seem that way, except for the presidential. But you guys are gearing up for re-election,
Right.
I understand.
Absolutely, absolutely.
How many Democratic candidates are there this year?
In the entire state, we have, I believe, approximately 65 real races, real districts covered.
Yeah.
As usual, as is typically the case, some districts are more competitive than others, mostly because of the nature of the districts, and that's no surprise.
And in District 52, there are just the two of you?
Yes, we're running, and so off we go.
Absolutely. So, what I'd love to do is to introduce our readers a bit more to you, who may not be up on politics.
Sure.
How many terms have you served?
I've served since 2008.
Okay. And what leadership positions do you hold in the legislature and caucus?
I am the caucus chair of the Democratic caucus. So there are two positions, the leader and the caucus chair. The leader is typically in charge of the message and I say that, and on the floor of the House, caucus chair is typically in charge of the political side.
Gotcha.
And so I'm very deeply involved in the races all across the state, for example, and generally very involved if we are in a political fight with the governor or with the Republicans.
So all the time.
Sadly.
That's me saying that. Your district includes, parts of Antioch.
It kind of runs in a line from East Nashville all the way down to Antioch.
What have you been hearing from your constituents about their concerns in this election as you've been contacting people? I know, of course, COVID.
COVID, yeah, it's funny you say, you're right. COVID is, of course, of central concern. But it's interesting, COVID is now kind of it's like a constellation of problems, and
Right.
Different people and families have very different positions. I really feel like as a state representative talking to a lot of people, I do have maybe a deeper understanding than many people of kind of what the country is going through with COVID, because here's what I've experienced. I don't know if this is consistent with your experience. You've got a lot of people for whom COVID is a healthcare challenge. These are people that are they're on a fixed income, they're seniors that have already established their financial situation is really not changed by COVID because they're getting a retirement check or what have you. And so for them, COVID is a dire health threat, but it's not an economic problem.
Right.
That's very different from another group of people for whom the healthcare concerns are actually somewhat less important than the immediate financial concerns. There are a lot of people in my district who, in January of this year, were very financially successful because the economy was going well. These are people that worked in restaurants, people that worked in the music industry. They were having a great year.
Right.
Their incomes went from, significant incomes, some of them make a lot of money, to essentially zero overnight. And so they are facing deep financial stress. I literally have talked to people who are living in their cars after having made, many thousands of dollars a month working as bartenders,
Right.
And so the point is, there are two different situations for people. We've been trying to deal with that both ways. I realize it's a long-winded answer. So my office has spent an enormous amount of time trying to help the people that are out of work with unemployment benefits. At the same time, trying to call on the governor to, I think, more vigorously address the healthcare challenge. And frankly, we've not been successful with that, unfortunately. That's where we are.
And we've got to be behind the ball on that, given the continued refusal of healthcare funding that we should have been getting all along, much less, you know.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you know, you can wind me up when it comes to Medicaid expansion. I've been talking about it for years. Um, I, I, I will say the failure of the Republicans to pass Medicaid expansion, we're one of the handful of states now that has not done that. States like Nebraska and Oklahoma, super red states, have passed Medicaid expansion mostly because of ballot initiatives, which we don't have in Tennessee except for constitutional changes. That is the biggest failure that's occurred while I don't know. There are a lot of bad laws, unfortunately, and bad policies promoted in the Tennessee legislature. But in terms of harming the most people, our
Right.
failure to get on board with the Affordable Care Act for no other reason than President Obama is the one who spearheaded and passed it is just it's a travesty, and it's terrible policymaking. I don't have to, you know. So
Yeah.
anyway.
And it's helped put us in the position that we're in right now with the closure of rural hospitals and the lack of care for large geographical areas. I mean, thank goodness we're in Nashville, where we do have access to health care, but a lot of our citizens are left out in the cold.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And right at a time when we need to have maximum healthcare dollars in our state, both from an economic standpoint and from a healthcare standpoint. We need those hospitals not only to be curing people, to be available for emergencies, but to be providing jobs. Um, Anyway, it's just the Republicans, and I say the Republicans, sometimes both parties are involved in various issues. This is one where there's just a clear divide. The Democrats are 100% for expansion, and the Republicans are the problem.
Right.
And at some point, you know, I hope we don't have to wait to be the last state in the union, but there are just a few holdouts,
Yeah.
and it's just terrible policymaking. I'm hopeful that once, assuming President Trump is thrown out of office, which he should be, slight political bias on my part, but you know, assuming we have a new president, maybe people will give up. I think they're, you know, at that point, the federal government presumably will do everything it can to ensure that expansion happens throughout the rest of the country. So I'm hopeful that the presidential election is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. And in a year or two, we'll have expansion just like Kentucky, Virginia, and all these states right around us.
Yeah. You know, and I know you mentioned talking to a lot of people about COVID, but I know your office in particular has been doing a lot of outreach for your constituent services, very active, not waiting for people to call you, but contacting them. And is that an ongoing process as well of?
Yes, it is. Thanks for asking. Yes, and particularly in an emergency situation like this, which is how I view COVID, particularly because Southeast Nashville is a hotspot for COVID. We have tried to figure out every way we can to reach out to the constituents to make sure they understand, hey, we're the people, like when it comes to unemployment, we actually, and I wouldn't suggest to people that we're a cure-all.
Right.
There are a lot of people with difficult unemployment claims, but we're the people that are in a position to help because it's the Department of Labor of the state of Tennessee that monitors and resolves these claims. And it helps to have your state rep in there helping you. Same with other issues. We get all sorts of calls about particular issues from other people that have problems with business issues, with loans, et cetera, all COVID related healthcare issues. And we try to basically put people with the right state agency because the state has a lot to say about kind of the day-to-day down in the weeds responding to constituents, you know, to people's needs.
And I should be, you know, I should have said this a little earlier, but in full disclosure, I have been until last week one of your constituents.
I wondered when you said you'd moved if you'd left us. I knew you were in the district, so I thought.
I've received so much mail and phone calls from your office checking in to make sure we're okay. You know, just as individuals, I showed the letter to my husband. I was like, this came, you know, can you believe that? So absolutely has been very active and I appreciate that.
I'm glad that worked out. Terrific.
You know, moving on to our particular demographic, your history with the LGBT community is long, and you know, over the years, what are some of the proud moments for you, and what are some of the things that you wish we could have done more on?
Well, a thing I wish we could have done more on, we had the slate of hate,
Yeah.
and a lot of those bills were blocked. Bills, as you know, slate of hate, and you all have covered it extensively, and, a variety of bills trying to prevent or promote discrimination in adoption, trying to promote or protect businesses that discriminate, all of these various bills, all designed, I think, to superimpose on a society that is becoming very rapidly enlightened, superimpose views that most people have discarded, and superimpose them by statute, basically. The problem that the sponsors of the slate of hate bills have is that the public doesn't agree with them. And so they're trying to basically use our statute, our power, lawmaking power, to kind of keep us back in the 1960s,
Right.
There are many ways in which our country is not improving, I think, because really of who's leading it. But one area that we can look at, I think, with great hopefulness, is the improvement of our country's, I guess, openness and just general response to and embracing of our LGBT citizens for full equality and rights. That's obviously a long journey, not complete by any standard, and very patchwork. And some people experience much more discrimination than others, depending on where they live, where they go to school. But clearly, we have witnessed an age in which our country has just vastly improved for a large number of our citizens, and that's to be celebrated at a time when we look at other areas where we're not improving. Anyway, back to the slate of hate. The slate of hate is all an effort by some in Tennessee to kind of push that back, to not allow us to move forward. And that's going to fail in the long term, but we know, for example, the adoption bill slipped through, which essentially is there to allow discriminatory adoption.
Right.
And, I thought it was killed. And then, of course, like a lot of these bad ideas, it reared its ugly head and, out the door, and we weren't able to stop it.
Right.
So that was a great disappointment. Now, I think back on particularly one event that I have to give credit to the activists, not to me, but to the people that have worked on these issues, and like Tennessee Equality Project and others. But there was a time when I was given the opportunity to file an Attorney General opinion request to make crimes against transgender citizens hate crimes. And I was extremely pleased to be able to do that. And I was extremely pleased that the Attorney General, and I think it was the law required this, or was the right decision, but nevertheless, I was extremely pleased that the Attorney General came back with the right answer, and I believe made Tennessee the first Southern state to specifically recognize such crimes as hate crimes. And I will say on a personal level, it was touching because I have rarely acted in a way in which I received so many personal statements from citizens, saying, just really reaching out from around the state to thank me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I even, at the time, I actually didn't know that this was so unprecedented in the South. And so I was just touched by some of the stories I heard. We're all, I speak for myself, I hope we're just moving into an age in which, that's completely non-controversial. It's obvious that, that's a hate crime, in which rights are just established and clear, and I think we are moving there. And I think it is a vast improvement in our nation, vast, huge. It really, it makes us a better country, because a country that, it's a cliche, but a country in which some people are completely oppressed and their rights are taken from them, that's not that's the benchmark by which a country is measured, not how the majority that rules the country is doing, that group is always doing well, relatively speaking. Anyway, so I was glad to be able to play a small role in Tennessee in that particular instance. And more generally, I've been very pleased to be asked a lot of times to participate in fighting bad bills and promoting good legislation or good administrative issues with respect to issues affecting the LGBT community. I will say, I think that LGBT citizens are particularly well represented in the legislature in the sense of that they're activists, perhaps because of long struggle, are extremely astute and effective, and they're great to work with, and I always feel like there's a team approach, and I feel like the citizens also who are particularly interested in these issues are very supportive as well and always ready to stand up and show up and do things and go to committee. So you really feel like you're part of this team, and that's not always true. There are other constituencies where that's not the case. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but I hope as I look back on my career, I think I'll always look back on some of these opportunities as some of the very highest points of my, limited political input into our state's history.
So looking forward, we're standing at a very uncertain time. The election is coming up, and it's more important than it has been in a while. And we're in this pandemic. But where do you see Tennessee in the next 2 years? What would you like to see happen here?
Well, with respect to the issues we're talking about, I'd like to see some spectacular failures with respect to the slate of hate. I'd like to see more business pressure brought. We just need to say, look, the people coming to our state and bringing money to our state and investing in our state and moving into our state, and these, broadly speaking, reject all of this nonsense. And we as a state need to take it and bundle it up and put it in the appropriate file and be done and just kind of move on. Enough of essentially using legislation to attack citizens is what you're really doing. So hopefully I'd like to see some real failure on the part of the sponsors of those bills. And so that I think would have a dampening effect on future, maybe we can kind of move to the next phase. Okay. So I'd like to see that. I think that's going to be, I would probably be overly optimistic if I said it's all going to go away, but I'd like to see a decline, based on failure over time of those kind of hate-driven, divisive and pointless pieces of legislation. More broadly, I do think after the presidential election, assuming Biden is elected, we'll expand Medicaid. I think at that point, the Republicans are going to have to recognize, look, this is going to be where we are for 8 years. And, are we going to continue throwing $1 billion+ into the trash, every 6 months? It's just ridiculous. It's such bad policy. I always say, it's hard to find someone against Medicaid expansion who's not a sitting member of the Republican caucus in the General Assembly. So I'd really like to see that happen. And then, of course, nationally, I'd like to see Trump leave, and I'd like to see the Biden administration come in and really just forget policy, just reimpose normal politics in our country again,
right?
Normal levels of discussion. You know what I mean? That's the first step. Just get back to regular politics before we even do the first thing.
Right.
Those are my hopes.
Here in the state of Tennessee too. We have Governor Bill Lee, who isn't Trump, but that's about all I would say. Especially this year. I was a little more moderate on the issue until he introduced the abortion ban and traded that in at the last minute after midnight. On those kind of social issues, do you think that we'll have enough, because we'll clearly still probably be a minority after the election, but do you think we'll have enough voice to kind of bark down those specific bad bills?
I make no claims. I got to tell you, I'm very proud. During the time I've been caucus chair, we have won seats from the Republicans in Memphis, in Nashville, and in Knoxville. We won a seat in McMinnville also, then we lost it, however, so I don't, that was hard fought. I will say we lost, Representative Dunlop lost his race during a time when in counties where Trump got 75% of the vote. So he did pretty well. He lost by a small margin.
Right.
That's a pretty heavy burden to bear. So we have won seats kind of, I think, out of proportion to other political entities.
Right.
That said, I think it would be, I would like, if we picked up 4 seats, 5 seats, I would view that as a really satisfying season. If we did that, we would effectively on most days have the supermajority broken. You really need a third of the members present to stop debate. And anyway, I can see this year being the year that happens, particularly because if Trump stays 10 points down, even though he'll still probably prevail in Tennessee and get those electoral votes, if that's the baseline, obviously that helps every Democrat. And the good news is we've got Democrats across the state really running hard, and some of them actually in very difficult terrain. And they really need to be celebrated because it's difficult work running for office. And these are really the people at the vanguard of our movement.
Right.
Anyway, so I hope because of the change in climate, we see some real relief.
Right. And there are some promising races, I understand. So, fingers crossed, we can cross at least that line and hold off some of this tide.
Right.
Well, thank you, Representative Stewart, for your time.
Hey, thank you so much. And thanks